I'm Professor Theodore Whitmore, a seasoned expert with over 20 years of experience in the fields of psychology and personal development. Welcome to the Whitmore Way. Have you ever set a goal, been absolutely fired up, made a plan, and then failed? Maybe you told yourself, this time is going to be different, but then life got in the way. Your goal felt so close, yet somehow it slipped through your fingers. I get it. I've been there. And if you've ever been there too, trust me, you're not alone. We all set goals. That's part of human nature, right? We want to grow, achieve, and become better versions of ourselves. But there's something deeper going on when we fail. Something more than just a lack of discipline or willpower. Let me share a story with you that might sound familiar. About 10 years ago, I was teaching a class on personal development. One of my students, let's call her Emily, was bright, ambitious, and eager to succeed. Emily came to me one day, excited because she had set a new goal. She was going to launch her own business. She had done all the right things, researched, wrote a business plan, even got a mentor. She was on fire. But a few months in, she called me, feeling disillusioned, lost. "I'm not making any progress," she said, and I could hear the frustration in her voice. "What's wrong with me, Professor Whitmore?" And I thought, how many of us have felt that exact same way? How many of us have set big, bold goals only to fall short, wondering why we failed when we seemed so prepared at the start? Today, I want to dive deep into why that happens. Because the truth is, and I say this with all the experience I've gathered, it's not about whether or not you can succeed. It's about understanding the deeper reasons behind why goals sometimes slip through our fingers despite our best efforts. So, let's take a journey together. Let's break down the real reason why you've ever set goals and failed. Let's unlock the key to overcoming this struggle so that when you set your next goal, it's not about if you'll succeed, but when. Okay, so let's get into it. Why do so many of us fail after setting big goals? This is something I've studied deeply, both in my own life and in the countless individuals I've worked with over the years. And the truth is, there are layers to why we stumble. But let me give you one of the most significant reasons, one that isn't always obvious at first. It's what I call the mismatch between expectations and reality. When Emily came to me feeling defeated, she was crushed because she had set the expectation that she would succeed quickly. She imagined launching her business, getting clients, seeing revenue come in, and feeling this constant upward trajectory, all within the first few months. Now, I want to stop right here and ask you, have you ever done that yourself? Set a goal and then expected immediate results? The problem with this expectation is that it doesn't take into account the time it actually takes to build anything meaningful. Whether it's a new business, a fitness routine, or a relationship, real success is a slow, consistent climb. There's no shortcut. In Emily's case, she hit some roadblocks. She didn't anticipate the difficulty of customer acquisition, the challenges of managing cash flow, or the way her own confidence would fluctuate. It wasn't that Emily lacked ability or talent, it was that her expectations were out of alignment with the reality of the process. So here's the first takeaway I want you to reflect on. Your goals will always take longer than you think, and that's okay. In fact, that's actually a good thing because it means you're learning, growing, and developing resilience along the way. I remember when I first started my own journey toward personal development. I set a big goal for myself, to become a professor at a prestigious university. Sounds simple enough, right? But what I didn't realize at the time was how many years of hard work, rejection, and personal growth would be required to reach that milestone. I had to work through doubts, failure, and countless setbacks. But every step was necessary for me to learn not just the material but also the mindset to truly thrive in that role. This mismatch between what we expect and what actually happens often leads to frustration. And that frustration, if not managed correctly, can cause us to give up, telling ourselves that we're just not cut out for success. But here's the secret I've learned over the years. Real growth happens in the patience, not the perfection. It's in the moments when we are not seeing immediate results, but we continue to put in the effort, to trust the process, and to believe that our work will eventually pay off. But wait, there's more. There's another hidden obstacle that trips us up in our pursuit of success, and that obstacle is rooted in mindset. You've heard the saying, your thoughts create your reality. It's a cliche, sure, but like most cliches, it's also true. If you set a goal but have a deeply rooted belief that you don't deserve to succeed, or worse, that failure is inevitable, your mindset becomes your own worst enemy. Let me break this down with another story. A few years ago, I had the privilege of working with a client named Mark. Mark was incredibly talented. He was an executive at a growing tech company, and he wanted to take his career to the next level. The issue? Mark had a deep-seated fear of failure. It wasn't obvious at first. On the outside, he looked confident and capable. But when we dug deeper, we uncovered a pattern. Every time he reached a point where he was about to take on a big opportunity, he sabotaged himself. He would procrastinate, underprepare, and find excuses to back out. After a few sessions, we realized that Mark had developed this subconscious belief that no matter how hard he worked, success would always elude him. He had a negative internal script that said, "I'm not worthy of success," or "I'll never be good enough." And no matter how many strategies we discussed, his mindset kept pulling him back. This is one of the most common reasons why people fail at achieving their goals. It's not that they aren't capable, it's that their inner dialogue is constantly telling them otherwise. Mark needed to reframe his thinking. He needed to see failure not as the end, but as part of the process, a stepping stone rather than a final destination. Here's the hard truth. If you don't believe you can succeed, it becomes nearly impossible to take the actions necessary to make success a reality. So the second takeaway I want to leave you with today is this. Your mindset can either propel you forward or hold you back. When I worked with Mark, it wasn't enough just to talk about setting goals. We had to shift his beliefs about himself and his potential. Only then could he take the right steps with confidence and clarity. So, as you're reflecting on your past goals, whether you've succeeded or failed, I want you to ask yourself, what were your expectations? Were they in alignment with reality? And more importantly, what were the beliefs that guided your actions? The reality is, most of the time, we fail because we don't give ourselves the grace to go through the messy, imperfect, and sometimes frustrating process of becoming who we need to be to succeed. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to remind you, if you're finding this video helpful, make sure to hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing so we can continue this conversation. I've got so much more to share with you, and together we're going to unlock your highest potential. Your support helps this channel grow, and I appreciate you for being a part of this journey. So, we've talked about expectations and mindset, but there's another critical reason why so many people fail after setting goals, and this one, I believe, is often the most insidious of all: the fear of failure and the emotional resistance that comes with it. Now, this might sound familiar. You've set a goal, you're motivated, everything seems clear, until you start thinking about what might happen if you fail. Suddenly, the pressure begins to build. You start thinking, what if I fall short? What if everyone sees me fail? What if I embarrass myself? This fear can be so overwhelming that we procrastinate, we avoid, we self-sabotage. And I've seen this in both my personal life and in the lives of countless students and clients. You might think that failure is a bad thing. After all, society tells us that failing is something to avoid at all costs. But let me challenge that belief right now. What if I told you that failure isn't the worst thing that can happen? What if I told you that failure, in many ways, is a powerful teacher? Let me tell you a personal story. Years ago, when I first started teaching at Oxford, I was nervous. I had never taught in such a prestigious setting, and I was worried that my colleagues would judge me. On my first lecture, I was so nervous that I completely stumbled over my words. I misquoted research. I forgot to make an important point. I could feel the sweat on my brow, and I'm sure my students could sense it too. In my mind, I had failed, and it felt awful. But something incredible happened after that. I reflected on the experience, and I realized that the failure was actually necessary. It wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of me becoming a better speaker, a better professor, and a better communicator. In fact, that failure helped me connect with my students more deeply because they saw that I was human, just like them. I became more compassionate with myself, and in turn, I became a better educator. So, let me ask you, how many of you avoid going after a goal because of that fear of failing, of looking silly or imperfect? The truth is, failing isn't something to fear. The real failure happens when you never try. It happens when you let that fear paralyze you and stop you from taking the first step toward your dreams. This is where the magic happens, in the messiness of starting, trying, and learning along the way. But it requires courage, the courage to fail, to pick yourself back up, and to keep going. When I work with clients, one of the biggest shifts we make is changing the way they view failure. You see, when you learn to embrace failure, you take away its power to control you. It becomes just a part of the process, part of the road to success. In fact, I've seen people achieve more because they're not afraid to stumble. They take risks, they experiment, and they learn faster than those who are too afraid to fail. But this isn't an easy shift. It requires you to get really honest with yourself. I'm talking about acknowledging the why behind your fear of failure. Is it because you don't want to disappoint someone? Is it because you feel like you're not worthy of success? Or is it because deep down, you're afraid of what it means to actually succeed? Because succeeding would require you to step into a version of yourself that you might not feel ready for. I'll give you another example. A woman named Sarah came to me last year, struggling with her goal of getting into better shape. She'd tried many times before, dieting, exercising, but every time she hit a roadblock, she would quit. And the reason? She had an ingrained fear of success. Deep inside, Sarah was terrified that if she succeeded, she would have to maintain this new version of herself forever. She wasn't ready to commit to the lifestyle that came with the success of her goal. So instead of taking the small steps needed to make progress, she sabotaged herself every time. This fear of success is more common than you might think. It's the fear of change, the fear of the unknown, and sometimes the fear of losing comfort. But once Sarah realized this, once she admitted to herself that she was afraid of what it would mean to succeed, that's when everything started to shift. When you set a goal, you have to be ready for both the possibility of failure and the responsibility of success. It's not just about achieving the goal, it's about what happens when you get there and how you'll handle it. And so, here's the third takeaway for today. Your relationship with failure and success shapes your ability to achieve. If you're afraid to fail, you'll never be able to take the steps needed to succeed. And if you're afraid of success, you might unconsciously sabotage yourself. This brings me to another important point. The process of reaching a goal is just as important, if not more important, than the goal itself. So many people become fixated on the outcome, the shiny prize at the end, but the real transformation happens in the day-to-day steps, the small habits, the consistency, and the perseverance. Let's talk about habits for a moment. When I work with clients on their goals, we often spend time rethinking the habits that will make their goals a reality. After all, success isn't a one-time event. It's a collection of daily actions. The little things we do every day, even when it seems like nothing is changing, are the things that lead to lasting results. Take, for example, someone who wants to write a book. They might set a goal to finish a chapter every week. But here's the problem. If they're only focused on finishing the book, they might get discouraged if they miss a deadline or don't feel like writing one day. The trick is to build a habit around writing, even if it's just for 15 minutes a day. By focusing on the habit, the goal naturally begins to come together. So, my challenge to you is this. Don't just set a goal. Focus on the process, the habits that will get you there. And most importantly, embrace the journey, the lessons, the setbacks, and the growth along the way. So, we've uncovered some deep truths about why we fail when setting goals. We've discussed the mismatch between expectations and reality, the importance of mindset, and how fear, whether it's fear of failure or fear of success, can hold us back. But now, I want to focus on one of the most critical factors that separates those who succeed from those who don't: taking consistent action. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's obvious, Doctor Whitmore. Of course, taking action is the key. But here's where most people get it wrong. It's not just about taking action. It's about taking the right action, in the right way, at the right time. And what I mean by that is, often we get caught up in the big picture and forget to break things down into small, manageable steps. Let me tell you about a colleague of mine, someone I deeply respect. He's a renowned entrepreneur, and he once shared a story with me that's stuck with me ever since. He said that when he first started his business, he had big, bold goals, just like many of us do. But his real breakthrough came when he started focusing on the smallest actions that would create real momentum. Instead of trying to overhaul everything at once or set massive, overwhelming goals, he broke everything down into tiny, actionable steps. Every day, he asked himself, what is the next small step I can take to move forward today? And guess what happened? Consistent, small actions added up over time and led him to the huge success he now enjoys. So here's the key. Start with the next small step. You don't need to have it all figured out right away. It's about creating momentum, one action at a time. Now, I know that building momentum can feel challenging, especially if you're starting from scratch or trying to pick up the pieces after a setback. But that's why it's so important to set your goals in alignment with your values and passions. When your goal feels authentic, when it truly matters to you, it won't feel like a chore to take action. You've probably heard the saying, do what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. While that's a little idealistic, it contains a lot of truth. When you're deeply connected to your why, you'll find that the action required to achieve your goal doesn't feel like a burden. Instead, it feels like a natural part of who you are. You'll feel energized, even when things get tough. But here's the thing. Motivation comes and goes. Some days, you'll feel like you can conquer the world. On other days, it'll feel like you're barely making any progress. This is where your mindset plays a huge role. The key is to keep going, even when motivation dips. So how do you stay consistent when motivation isn't there? Simple. Create systems, not just goals. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of relying on motivation to get things done, create systems that force you to take action regardless of how you feel. For example, let's say your goal is to exercise more. Instead of waiting until you feel like it, set up a system where you commit to exercising at a specific time each day. No excuses. You don't need to feel motivated. The system takes care of it for you. This is something I practice in my own life. When I was working towards my PhD, there were countless days when I didn't feel like studying, when I wanted to quit and just take a break. But I didn't rely on motivation to push me forward. I created a system of study times, deadlines, and accountability that helped me stay on track. And eventually, I earned my degree. Another powerful tool is accountability. When you're on a journey of transformation, whether it's towards a big goal or just a better version of yourself, it helps to have someone by your side, someone who can hold you accountable. This might be a mentor, a friend, or even a coach. But having that accountability partner can make all the difference in pushing you to show up, even when it feels difficult. Now, let's take a moment and talk about failure once again. I want to remind you that failure is not the end. In fact, failure is essential to success. Every failure is a lesson. Every setback is an opportunity to learn, grow, and get stronger. What separates successful people from unsuccessful people is that successful people don't let failure stop them. They use failure as feedback. They adapt, they adjust, and they keep moving forward. Let me ask you, what would happen if you looked at every setback, every failure, as a stepping stone to your success? What if you stopped fearing failure and instead embraced it as a part of your journey? This mindset shift is crucial. If you can look at failure as a natural part of your growth process, it will no longer have the power to hold you back. In fact, it will propel you forward because you'll understand that every time you fall, You're one step closer to where you need to be. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final thought. The only true failure in life is not trying at all. If you've ever set a goal and fallen short, you haven't failed. You've just found one way that doesn't work. But as long as you're willing to pick yourself up, adjust your approach, and keep going, you are on the path to success. So, as you move forward, I encourage you to take one small step today. No matter how small, no matter how imperfect. Commit to the process, embrace the journey, and trust that you are capable of achieving your dreams. And remember, you are more than your failures. You are more than your setbacks. You are capable, you are worthy, and you have everything you need to succeed, as long as you keep going. Before we finish, I want to remind you to like this video if you found it helpful, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or any experiences you've had with goal setting. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to do so we can continue this transformative journey together. Your support means everything to me, and I can't wait to continue unlocking the best version of yourself, one step at a time.